Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. For those who celebrated, I hope you had a very Merry Christmas with your family yesterday. Let's jump in. Yesterday, we discussed big infrastructure and a growing chorus of Chinese economists warning that these projects are increasingly, at best, suboptimal and at worst, counterproductive, putting more stress on already painfully stressed local government balance sheets with little or no productivity gains. Today, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin published a long piece explaining that China is undergoing a canal construction surge as part of a long-term strategy to boost the inland waterway transport network and drive economic growth. With at least 5 major projects underway or in planning, the government envisions an interconnected network of waterways spanning the country. However, the Caixin writers argue that the ambitious initiative comes with hefty costs, uncertain returns, and significant challenges. The estimated investment in these projects exceeds 850 billion yuan, $117 billion, drawn from government grants, local bonds, and policy bank loans. Among the flagship undertakings is the 135-kilometer Pinglu Canal, expected to cost 73 billion yuan and become the first man-made waterway connecting a river to the sea since 1949. The Zhigangyue Canal, stretching nearly 2,000 kilometers, promises to surpass even the ancient Grand Canal in length. Despite such grand plans, progress in expanding high-class waterways, navigable for vessels of at least 1,000 tons, remains slow. While highways and railroads have seen dramatic expansion in recent years, inland waterways have grown by just 1% since 2014. In 2023, investment in waterways was a mere 201.6 billion yuan, dwarfed by the 2.8 trillion yuan allocated to roads. The financial viability of these projects is under scrutiny, however. Revenue generation largely depends on tolls from vessels, but income often falls short of operational and maintenance costs, let alone the costs of capital. The Jianghuai Canal, which began operations in 2023, exemplifies this issue, Tyson explains. Despite promises of cost savings and reduced emissions, its toll revenues barely cover daily expenses. Rising fees could deter usage, while lower fees would increase reliance on subsidies, very much an unsustainable model. Local governments, already burdened with debt from previous infrastructure projects, face added pressure. Many provinces missed GDP growth targets in recent years, and officials are turning to canal construction as a stimulus measure. However, analysts warn that returns on these investments may not even cover the low financing costs, deepening financial strains. This, of course, will be a familiar story to regular China Update viewers. Local governments, chasing growth, pours capital into infrastructure that for almost a decade now has not shown returns. Beyond finances, the environmental and economic sustainability of the canals remains in question. Maintenance costs for upgraded waterways are expected to rise significantly, while declining demand for bulk commodities like coal and cement, driven by a slowing economy and a shift towards renewable energy, could undermine the utility of these waterways. China's canal push aims to reduce transport costs, cut emissions, and stimulate local economies. Yet the road, or rather the waterway, to achieving these goals is fraught with uncertainty. Without robust planning, coordinated policies, and sustainable funding mechanisms, the risks of overinvestment and underperformance loom large, like they do with so many other great infrastructure projects we have seen in recent years, leaving local governments and the national economy to navigate murky waters ahead. Next up, let's move to diplomacy. China and Japan have taken a significant step toward improving their often strained relationship, agreeing on yesterday, to hold discussions on contentious security issues. The decision was reached during Japanese Foreign Minister Takashi Iwaya's visit to Beijing, where he met with Chinese Premier Li Qiang and Foreign Minister Wang Yi. The meetings marked Iwaya's first trip to China since assuming office in October. Describing the talks as very candid and wide-ranging, Iwaya emphasized the establishment of a personal rapport that could foster future collaboration. In a notable development, Wang Yi agreed to visit Japan next year for high-level economic discussions focusing on environmental cooperation, energy conservation, and healthcare. Amid progress, long-standing issues persist. Japan expressed concerns about Chinese military activity near contested islands and territorial disputes in the South China Sea, a waterway for which Japan is incredibly reliant. In response, both sides agreed to initiate a Japan-China security dialogue to enhance communication and reduce tensions. Further steps to rebuild trust include Japan's easing of visa requirements for Chinese visitors, reflecting China's recent move to allow visa-free entry to Japanese travelers. Both countries hope that increased people-to-people exchanges will enhance mutual understanding. Of course, this comes at a time where mutual distrust is at all-time highs, and where China has seen a series of attacks on Japanese, including murders in the country. And there is, of course, the wider geopolitical rivalry, which very much remains in place. We should see these developments from yesterday more about erecting or strengthening guardrails than deeply improving relations. Next up, we move to the Chinese economy and the emerging consensus that China is now entering a Japan-style lost decade. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, don't forget to hit the like button. Liking, sharing, and subscribing is a tremendous help for the channel. About 44% of regular viewers are not subscribed. It'd be wonderful if we could get those down below 40%. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description below for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable and have access to exclusive bonus videos as well. The next one will be coming up on Sunday. This is also a tremendous help. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Okay, next up. Earlier this week, we examined an excellent piece by Ling Wei of the Wall Street Journal, arguing that Xi Jinping is pushing China into a lost decade. This Sunday, I will release a full unpacking of this piece as a bonus video for Patreons and channel members. Wei's article has caused a stir in the Chinese community, in the China analyst community, resulting in much debate. An interesting exchange between two voices we quote often on China Update occurred as well. Brad Setster, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, and Peking University professor of finance Michael Pettis. I wanted to end today by examining some of their exchange. For the sake of brevity and clarity, I'll quote selected excerpts from Setster's comments first, then move to those from Pettis, then back to Setster. Let's begin with Setster. Quote, "It isn't clear that President Xi would share the suggesting in Ling Wei's latest assessment of China's economy that China is flirting with a lost decade. But that, in a sense, is the point. Xi looks at China's success in building a world-leading EV industry, the emergence of a semiconductor design and manufacturing cluster centered around Huawei and SMIC, and China's strength in clean technology manufacturing, and sees a success story. Ling Wei and many liberal Chinese economists see an economy that is still stifled by the heavy hand of the state and the party, and that can neither safely level up nor grow without leveling up, and see an economy that has lost its dynamism. One big revelation in the Wall Street Journal story is that Xi himself wasn't initially concerned by deflation. What's wrong with falling prices? And thus was the ultimate source of the now broken taboo against talking about deflation risks. To me, of course, the structural weakness in China's economy goes beyond the dominance of the state in deciding the allocation of credit in the economy. China's failure to build a consumption engine over the next 10 years is now its Achilles heel. My 2022 Foreign Affairs article was less about the direct risk of financial stability from the bursting of the real estate bubble, and much more about the difficulty China would face finding an alternative growth engine. I am a bit biased, but I think my argument has stood the test of time. It highlighted the risk that China, that lacked an investment engine, would pivot back to exports as a source of growth. That risk has manifested itself this year, as the IMF has belatedly acknowledged. Looking back, China's ability to recover from COVID in 2021 without doing a stimulus of its own, a recovery that was driven by exports and the positive spillovers to China that the EU-US stimulus to demand, set Xi up to believe that he could still rely on investment. And now China faces the risk that its export-driven recovery will falter in the face of resistance from its trading partners, not just the United States, something that Paul Krugman highlighted in one of his final columns. And manufacturing overcapacity, still a forbidden topic in China. It is easier to talk of overcapacity in the financial sector than in the manufacturing sector. and falling profitability in key industrial sectors risks a new downturn. End quote. Now to Pettis. Quote, in fact, many analysts, including in the West, believe that by shifting investment from real estate to manufacturing, China was finally making the long-needed shift from non-productive investment to productive investment. But this argument was always wrong, and for reasons that should have been obvious. That's because there is nothing intrinsically productive about investing in manufacturing, nor intrinsically non-productive about investing in real estate. What matters is the extent of demand and the gap between desired investment and actual investment. After all, if there was so much productive investment available in the manufacturing sector, just waiting for the chance to contribute to sustainable Chinese growth, why did the Chinese private sector take nearly 15 years from the late 2000s, when investment in infrastructure and real estate collectively started to become a problem, to finally discover these investment opportunities? And why did it take a collapse in real estate investment to start the process? I'd argue to the contrary, that if this manufacturing investment was profitable after the collapse of the real estate bubble, it should have been even more profitable before the collapse, when consumption was healthier. It's hard to believe that Chinese businesses were too stupid to understand how much they needed to expand manufacturing until 2022, when the decline in the real estate sector created the need to find another source of investment to prop up demand. And of course, they weren't. Their problem then and today is that domestic demand was and is too weak to justify a huge increase in manufacturing investment, and that even without the rise in global trade conflict, this was never going to be practical. End quote. Now back to Setster. Quote, China's post-COVID, post-real estate bubble growth has been driven by exports. Especially this year, 12% plus export volume growth is huge when global trade is growing at 3%, and massive new investments in manufacturing. She apparently believes that China has pivoted from unproductive real estate investment to productive investments in so-called new productive forces, and in the process strengthened China's geopolitical position. But China's failure to generate a self-sustaining domestic consumption engine, to absorb the massive increase in the production capacity of its economy, is a fundamental weakness, one that does now, in my opinion, risk a lost decade. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.